Hey, everybody. Welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Should be a great conversation here tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We have a lot of fun things to talk about tonight. So it's going to be awesome. So yeah, let's jump right into it.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action. All right, everybody. Welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be very, very interesting what develops. I'm hearing the news breaking just now that someone has been killed in the protests in Atlanta. So I don't know the whole story about that, but I'm seeing that a protester was just killed. So I will have to put that on hold. I'll have to look into the news story and see about that. But it sounds like an important development. So I'm not belittling that by any means. I'm going to get into my prepared remarks for tonight, but please don't think I'm not holding that situation to be important. It seems like a very important situation. So keep that in mind. I'm going to be looking into that. I know there's been a lot of protests around police brutality in Atlanta. And so there you go. But folks, the way these streams generally work is I give my opening remarks. The opening remarks are what I want to cover and talk about, and my kind of analysis, etc. And then after that, I do the roll call. And during the roll call, I find out who's on the other side of the camera. We call everybody out, names and locations. And then the last part of these streams is always the Q&A session where I answer super chat questions. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, by all means, just shoot me a super chat question and I will answer it in the second half of the show. That's how it works. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a super chat. I will write it down and answer it in the second half of the show. I'll put you on the list, and that's the way it works. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I am about to jump right into my opening remarks. Folks, there's a certain understanding of how the world works and why political events are developing the way that they are developing that is unique to Marxism, that is unique to genuine scientific Marxism. And what makes these streams so valuable for many people is that we put forward that understanding on these streams. And this understanding was quite common during the 1930s when the global communist movement was rising. It was very widespread. People understood why the Great Depression was happening. People understood why fascism was on the rise. People understood why the labor movement was happening. People understood why a new world war was on the horizon. In the 1930s, the Communist International provided this understanding to people, and it gave people a consciousness of why society was in the situation it was in, that they could then utilize in order to fit themselves into the struggle to make life better. And this understanding, you talk about the Great Depression, it was put forward by the various Marxists and revolutionaries. The Soviet Union gave people this understanding, but it goes back further. Karl Marx had this understanding in his lifetime. Throughout the 19-teens and the lead up to World War I, and even in the 1920s, people had this understanding. But right now, even though Marxism is being widely discussed in our time, and it is being widely discussed, there is widespread interest in Marxism, this understanding of why society moves in certain directions and why economic crises happen and what is the result of an economic crisis. Where does an economic crisis come from? What is the response to it? All of this is lost. You really have to go back and read old books if you want to find out this understanding. It's bizarre. It is the best way of understanding what we're facing now. But really, you have to dig into very old books if you want to understand it. Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt. This is a book that was published in 1934. And it explains what we're living under right now. Now, there are a few other books that put forward this understanding, the understanding that we put forward on these streams, that are a little more recent, that give kind of an explanation. The one book that I very widely recommend is by a Marxist named Nelson Peary. And he wrote this book, The Future is Up to Us. And this is a book basically predicting the crisis that we're in now, before it had fully broken out. This was written before the 2008 financial meltdown. I believe this was published in 2003. But Nelson Peary, a black Marxist leader of a Maoist communist group for most of his life, he was the founder of the Communist Labor Party. He published this book in 2003, basically predicting that because of the computer revolution, the United States would have a big economic crisis, and then that economic crisis would lead to the rise of a new form of fascism. He lays it all out. He basically says what was going to happen in here because he came out of the Communist Party. He came out of the Communist Party USA. He'd been in the Communist Party of the United States. He'd been a Maoist communist leader, and he understood it. He had this understanding. So he wrote this book, The Future is Up to Us, laying out this very important understanding. Another book that I would recommend is called High Tech, Low Pay. And this is by Sam Marcy, the founder of the Workers' World Party. He had been a member of the Communist Party during the 1930s. He understood the problems of capitalism. He understood why the Great Depression had happened. He understood why the Soviet Union had not experienced the Great Depression, where World War II had come from. So he wrote this book, High Tech, Low Pay. I recommend it. And then one of Sam Marcy's disciples, a guy named Fred Goldstein, he wrote this book, Low Wage Capitalism. And, as much as I'm critical of Fred, he wasn't very fun to work with. He's a bit of a gruff fellow. He wrote a decent book. This book pretty much explains where the 2008 financial crisis came from, why it's happening, and what to do about it, and why it will inevitably lead to World War III unless there's some kind of resistance. I really don't want people to think that the analysis that I put forward on these streams is something I thought of myself, right? That I was just sitting in the bathtub one night and I said, I know the crisis is caused by capitalism. And the solution is this. And during the crisis of capitalism, the capitalists moved toward fascism because of this. I didn't think of any of this. I am applying the analysis to the current situation. That is what I'm doing. And there are not voices out there saying what I'm saying. But these are not original ideas. And in fact, these ideas, if you go to China, if you go to Russia, if you go to Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua, you go to South America, these ideas are pretty widespread. People don't think they're deeply profound. Here, let me write down this super chat question. All right. All right. People don't think they're deeply profound. They're pretty standard. But because of the weird situation that we're in politically right now, because things are very, very strange, because actual Marxism has been usurped by CIA, Rockefeller funded, Ford Foundation funded synthetic leftism, and people are very confused. This analysis is unique, and most people who consider themselves to be Marxists do not even have this analysis. So that's why these streams can sometimes get a little bit repetitive, because I am hammering home an understanding of where the crisis comes from, how the economic crisis is leading to a political crisis, and how that political crisis will inevitably lead to war. However, there is a way out, and that's called socialism. And there are countries around the world that are not experiencing this crisis because they have already adopted socialism. This understanding, I get a little bit repetitive about it because it's not as common. And it's not out there. Even though it's common all over the world, it's quite rare in the United States. So some of what I'm saying tonight, at least the opening of my opening remarks, the opening of my opening remarks, the opening bit here tonight might be a little bit repetitive. But when you have something important to say, it bears repeating, especially when nobody else is saying it. So I'm gonna make clear to you why we are facing an economic crisis. I'm just going to read to you, and I've read it to you all many, many times, and I'm going to read it to you again. I'm going to read it to you again because it must be read. All right, here we go. This is from the Communist Manifesto. Marx wrote this in 1848. He wrote, "For many a decade past, the history of industry and commerce is but the history of the revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production, against property relations that are conditions for the existence of the bourgeois and of its rule. It is enough to mention the commercial crises by their periodical return put the existence of the entire bourgeois society on its trial, each time more threateningly." He's talking about economic crises that happen. It used to be that you had an economic crisis every few years. Capitalism, the boom bust cycle, it would come to a halt. And this is back in 1848, before capitalism had fully even really emerged, when feudalism was still very well on the scene. Marx was noticing this. He wrote, quote, "In these crises, a great part not only of the existing products, but also of the previously created productive forces are periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that in all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity, the epidemic of overproduction. Society finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut off the supply of every means of substance. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of substance, too much means of industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of bourgeois property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions by which they are fettered. And so soon as they overcome these fetters, they bring disorder to the whole of bourgeois society and endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. And how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by the enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces, and on the other, by the conquest of new markets and by more thorough exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby these crises are prevented. Now, again, the problem with Marx is that he did not write very clearly. Right? Karl Marx did not write very clearly. He was a very good thinker, but Friedrich Engels, wrote much more clearly than Karl Marx. So we're going to pull up Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, and I will read you how Friedrich Engels put it. This is all very, very important. This is the foundation. This is essential, and nobody is talking about this now. This is essential to understanding any of this. But here we go. Here we go. All right. Here we go. This is Friedrich Engels. Here we go. Here we go. This rebellion of the productive forces as they grow more and more powerful against their quality as capital, this stronger and stronger command that their social character shall be recognized, forces the capitalist class itself to treat them more and more as social productive forces, so far as this is possible under capitalist conditions. The period of industrial high pressure, with its unbounded inflation of credit, not less than the crash itself, by the collapse of great capitalist establishments, tends to bring about that form of socialization of great mass of means of production, which we meet with different kinds of joint stock companies. Many of these means of production and distribution are, from their outset, so colossal, like railways, they exclude all other forms of capitalist expansion. At a further stage of evolution, this form also becomes insufficient. The producers on a large scale in a particular branch of industry in a particular country unite into a trust, a union for the purpose of regulating production. They determine the total amount to be produced and parcel it out among themselves, thus enforce the selling price fixed beforehand. But trusts of this kind, as soon as business becomes bad, are generally liable to break up, and on this very account compel yet greater concentration of association. The whole of a particular industry is turned into one gigantic joint stock company. Internal competition gives place to internal monopoly of this one company. This has happened in 1890 with the English Alki production, which is now the fusion of 48 large works into the hands of one company, conducted upon a single plan. Active social forces work exactly like natural forces, blindly, forcibly, destructively, so long as we do not understand or reckon with it. But when we once understand, when we once grasp their action, their direction, their effects, it depends only upon ourselves to subject them more and more to our will, and by means of them to reach their own ends. And this holds quite especially true of the mighty productive forces of today. As long as we obstinately refuse to understand the nature of the character and social means of action, this understanding goes against the grain of capitalist mode of production. So long as these forces are at work in spite of us, in opposition to us, so long as they master us, as we have seen here in detail, as we have shown here in detail. But once their nature is understood, they can, in the hands of producers working together, be transformed from the master demons into willing servants. As a matter of fact, since 1825, when the first general crisis broke out, the whole industrial and commercial world, production and exchange among all civilized people and their more or less barbaric hangers-on, are thrown out of joint once every 10 years. Commerce is at a standstill. The markets are glutted. Products accumulate as the multitudinous are as multitudinous as they are unsalable. Hard cash disappears, credit vanishes, factories are closed, the mass of workers are in want of the means of subsistence because they have produced too much of the means of subsistence. Bankruptcy follows upon bankruptcy, execution upon execution. The stagnation lasts for years. Productive forces and products are wasted and destroyed wholesale. until the accumulated mass of commodities finally filter off more and more or less depreciated in value until production and exchange gradually begin to move again. Little by little, the pace quickens. It becomes a trot. The industrial trot breaks into a canter. The canter, in turn, grows into a headlong gallop of a perfect steeplechase of industry, commercial credit, and speculation, which finally, after breakneck leaps, ends where it begins, in the ditch of a crisis. And so, over and over again, we have now, since the year of 1825, gone through this 5 times. At the present moment, that's in 1877, we are going through it for the 6th time. And the character of these crises is so clearly defined that Fourier hit all of them off when he described the first crisis plethora, a crisis of plethora. In these crises, the contradiction between socialized production and capitalist appropriation ends in violent explosion. The circulation of commodities is for a time being stopped. Money, the means of circulation, becomes a hindrance to circulation. All the laws of production and circulation of commodities are turned upside down. The economic collision has reached its apogee. The mode of production is rebelling against the mode of exchange. Writing it down. So, what does all of this mean? What does all of this that I just read to you mean? It means that in systems of the past, when people were homeless and you had a crisis of homelessness, it was caused by the fact that there wasn't enough housing. But under capitalism, people become homeless because there's too much housing. In systems of the past, when people were hungry and malnourished, it was caused by shortages of food. But only under capitalism have we ever had a problem where people become hungry and malnourished because there is too much food. This is capitalism. And I've said over and over and over again on these streams, I've told the coal miner's riddle. The story goes that there's a little boy. He says to his father, "Father, why is it so cold?" His father says, "Because we can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And the boy says, "Father, why can we not afford any coal to heat the stove?" He says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine. I got laid off." And the little boy says, "Father, why have you lost your job at the coal mine?" And the father says, "Because there is too much coal." That's capitalism. That's the problem of overproduction. The worker can never buy back what he produces. In order to make a profit, the capitalist cuts into the labor that the worker, the value that the worker produces. And technological leaps exacerbate this problem. The capitalist cannot extract profits from machines. The capitalist cannot extract profits from raw materials. The capitalist can only extract profits from human labor. Only human labor creates value through which capitalists can make profits. And when technology reduces the role of the worker in production, when there's less and less of a role for workers, when workers are edged out of production by machines more and more and more, the rate of profits that the capitalist can make goes down because he can only extract profits from human labor. And the inability of the worker to buy back what he produces is further exacerbated. And capitalism generally breaks down in response to great technological leaps because of everything I've just explained. The capitalist is constantly looking to produce as many goods as he possibly can, and he wants to maximize his profits in doing so. He wants to hire as few workers as he possibly can. He wants to pay the worker as little as he possibly can to produce those goods. He's in competition with other capitalists. He's constantly producing as many goods as he can. But the worker's ability to buy those goods is constantly decreasing. And the more technology advances, the smaller and lower the percentage of profit he can make on each of those goods. And as a result of that, huge technological leaps tend to lead to big, long-term economic crises. This is the fundamental law of capitalism. This is called the problem of overproduction. This is called the tendency of the rate of profits to fall. This is essential to understanding Marxism. Huge technological leaps lead to great poverty. A great example of that I've used on these streams many times is self-driving cars. Self-driving cars would be an amazing thing in a healthy society. If we had a rational, healthy economy and self-driving cars were invented, that would be awesome. All the human labor that goes into driving, all the people who have to be truck drivers, all the people who have to be cab drivers, all the people who have to be Uber drivers, the traffic courts, the state highway patrolmen, all of this human labor that is expended on driving could be applied elsewhere, and there would be a greater abundance. However, self-driving cars under capitalism, as was pointed out by Andrew Yang in the New York Times, if we switched to self-driving cars in America, there would be riots in the streets. That would be a catastrophe we couldn't imagine. Millions of people would lose their jobs. There would be desperate poverty all across America. There would be riots in the streets. Self-driving cars under capitalism lead to a disaster. Labor-saving technology under capitalism leads to a crisis of overproduction. Gluts are the natural result. Capitalism is constantly producing what economists call a glut. It's when the economy crashes because there's too much of something. And the government has invented all kinds of mechanisms for trying to stabilize the capitalist economy. I believe it's in the state of Missouri, there is a mountain that's got a cave in it. And the government does nothing. The U.S. federal government, the Department of Agriculture, goes and buys cheese from farmers. And then it buries them in a mountain. Did you know this? Right? Why do they do that? To keep the price of cheese high. Because we've gotten so good at milking those cows and making that cheese that if they didn't buy huge amounts of cheese and bury it in the ground, the price of cheese would go down so low that there wouldn't be any profits and American agribusiness would go under. This is capitalism. It's not rational. Under capitalism, abundance and efficiency, technological advancement, and abundance of material goods creates poverty. That's the irrationality of capitalism. And if you look throughout the history of capitalism, the Great Depression of the 1930s, it came as a result of great technological innovations. Henry Ford, in the 1920s, there was this genius in America called Henry Ford, and he figured out how to run factories very, very efficiently. No one had ever run factories as good as Henry Ford. And people from all over the world went to study Henry Ford and Fordism. They talked about Fordism and they said, wow, Henry Ford is a genius. He has figured out how to make production really, really efficient. This guy is making cars brilliantly. Henry Ford was the genius capitalist who developed all these technological leaps, all these great ways of making the production of cars more efficient. And pretty soon those methods spread to the production of all kinds of things, steel, and the industries were adopting Henry Ford's great technological breakthroughs. They actually had a slogan, Henry Ford has overtaken Marx, or Ford has defeated Marx. And that was said, look, Henry Ford has developed a method of capitalism, of running capitalist industrial production that is just so efficient, that it's made capitalism more profitable than ever. And what happened? In 1929, the stock market crashed. And there was a Great Depression all over the capitalist world. Why? Because they'd gotten so good at producing things. And that Great Depression inevitably led to the rise of fascism and the Second World War, but we'll get to that later. But capitalism always follows huge technological breakthroughs and leaps with a long-term economic crisis. So the crisis that we are living in now is the result of a huge technological leap called the computer revolution. The computer revolution has made capitalism no longer sustainable. It has eliminated the worker from the assembly line. It has reduced the role of human labor in production so dramatically that as a result of that, they can make products like never before, and they don't need to hire workers, and workers don't buy them. Meanwhile, the rate of profit, since there's so few workers involved in the production, the rate of profit that they can extract on those profits, on those products that they're making, is going down lower than ever before. We are living in a man-made economic crisis spawned by the tendency of the rate of profits to fall, overproduction, these built-in problems of the capitalist system. Just like the Great Depression was caused by Henry Ford's great breakthroughs in production, making production more efficient than ever, the Great Depression of our time, the long-term economic crisis that has been going on since 2008, it started with the 2008 financial meltdown and has never ended, is continuing, and it's a result of the computer revolution. And it was predicted. Sam Marcy predicted it. Fred Goldstein predicted it. Nelson Peary predicted it. Everyone saw this coming. Every Marxist, every scientific Marxist predicted this. In Cuba, there were all the Cuban government was saying that this was happening. When Bush was coming into office, the Cuban government was having conferences explaining that the USA is gonna enter a long-term economic crisis and explaining neoliberalism. And this is the result of the natural workings of capitalism. Capitalism is entering a long-term crisis because of technological leaps. So that's the first thing you need to understand, right? You don't get this understanding anywhere else. You don't get this understanding. I mean, no one talks about this. This is like Marxism 101. I just read you from the Communist Manifesto. I just read to you from Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Frederick Engels. This is Communism 101. This is basic. That under capitalism, technological leaps lead to long-term economic crises. That's the first thing. Now, what happens when you have an economic crisis? What happens? People lose their jobs, living standards go down, the capitalists try to make the workers pay for the crisis. They need the government to stabilize the capitalist system because it's broken down. They need the state to step in, right? They bailed out the banks. Remember the bailout, TARP, the bailout. They need the government to step in and try and stabilize the crisis. However, here's the catch. The capitalists can't agree about how the government should do it. In order for the government to take dramatic action, oh, very good. In order for the government to take dramatic action to stabilize the crisis, some capitalists have to be suppressed. One group of capitalists has to use the government to punish another group of capitalists in order to stabilize the crisis. That's how it works. When they start taking action and using the government to control industry, some capitalists are going to lose out and some capitalists are going to gain. So the capitalists that usually get along with each other. Ronald Reagan said, oh, we're all friends after 6 o'clock. That doesn't be when there's an economic crisis, that's no longer the case. The capitalists begin fighting among each other, among themselves. The government has to step in and stabilize the economy because the economy is failing and the rate of profit is going down and society is becoming less and less stable. But it's got to step in on the behalf of one group of capitalists at the expense of another. So the capitalists start suppressing each other. And this is called Bonapartism, because Karl Marx was living in 1851 in Paris, and he watched this happen. France had a parliament, a national assembly, had elections, but they entered a long-term economic crisis. So Napoleon's nephew, Louis Bonaparte, seized control of the government in a military coup. And when Napoleon III, Louis Bonaparte, seized control of the government in France in 1851, yes, he executed a lot of socialists and he used the military to put down strikes, but he also jailed a lot of wealthy French people who wouldn't go along with him. And a lot of wealthy French people had to flee the country because in order to try and stabilize the French economy, he had to seize the property of a lot of capitalists. He had to impose heavy taxes on a lot of capitalists. He had to pass laws like the 12-hour workday to stabilize industry. He had to, build railroads throughout France to stimulate the economy and hire the unemployed. He had to build hospitals for poor people so they stopped rioting. They could get free medical care in these low-income hospitals. He had to do a variety of different things. And Louis Bonaparte, he wasn't a communist. He wasn't a socialist. He was a Bonapartist. He was a member of the capitalist class, seizing control of the government, using the state to stabilize the economy and suppress members of his own class. This is called Bonapartism. And it's the political result of a capitalist crisis. When there is a capitalist crisis, the capitalists begin fighting among each other, trying to seize control of the state. Roosevelt was a Bonapartist in the United States, right? There was an economic crisis, and he aligned with the Rockefellers and the oil companies, and he suppressed the factory owners, and he taxed the rich heavily. He created Social Security. He promoted labor unions with the Wagner Act. He did it to stabilize capitalism. He said his goal was to save capitalism. That's what he did. And there are many, many examples of Bonapartism throughout history. Woodrow Wilson was a bit of a Bonapartist. And, the capitalists are always fighting with each other. During the American Civil War, you could argue Abraham Lincoln was a bit of a Bonapartist. He created the greenbacks. He executed a number of people within the capitalist class who were in favor of slavery, were violating laws against slave trading. And, he took dramatic moves to suppress members of his own class amid a capitalist crisis. And there are many examples throughout the history of capitalism of when a systemic crisis of capitalism happens. The capitalists begin fighting among each other. One faction of the capitalist class will seize control of the government and use the government to try and stabilize the economy. That's Bonapartism. But there is a special kind of Bonapartism that developed during the 1930s. And that is a kind of Bonapartism that says the way to save capitalism is with mass destruction. It says the only way we can save the capitalist system is with mass destruction. This is a Bonapartism. It's not like Roosevelt. Roosevelt said we're going to save capitalism by building highways and bridges and universities. We're going to hire the unemployed. We're going to increase the wages of industrial workers. We're going to form unions in the factories. He was not a fascist. Louis Bonaparte, he said the way we're going to stabilize capitalism is we're going to build railroads and we're going to build hospitals for the poor people, and we're going to have a 12-hour workday, and we're going to pass all these reforms. Not a fascist. Fascism is a particular brand of Bonapartism that tries to stabilize capitalism by driving down living conditions. That's the essence of fascism. It is the idea that because there's an economic crisis, we need to reduce the population. We need to forcibly degrow the economy, forcibly reduce consumption and get rid of living condition, reduce living standards. And we need to have a heavily controlled capitalism that is in a downward trend, that is decreasing the amount of wealth in society, decreasing workers' wages, creating an underclass of slave laborers, exterminating certain people we consider to be undesirable, decreasing the birth rate. That's what it is. And it's tied in with eugenics, and it's tied in with Malthusianism, and it's tied in with all kinds of very evil things. And that is fascism. That's what fascism is. It is a form of Bonapartism that says We're going to focus not on building bridges and highways, not on the government spending money to build things, not on increasing workers' living conditions in order to stabilize capitalism, but the opposite. The opposite focuses on making everyone poorer, reducing the population, reducing consumption to save capitalism. And the great example of fascism was the Holocaust. What did the Nazis do? They created a network of concentration camps. They reduced a huge section of the population to slave laborers. They started exterminating people. They exterminated millions and millions of people. They broke the labor unions and outlawed strikes. They had a heavily controlled economy focused on destroying in order to save capitalism. That's what Bonapartism is. That's what fascism is, I mean. Very good. So that's what fascism is. And fascism inevitably leads to war because it doesn't work. It's only temporary. It only works for a little bit. It only works for a little bit. But after a while, you can grind half the country into poverty. You can set up a network of concentration camps. You can create a class of slave laborers. You can exterminate a bunch of people. You can do stuff like that. But you're still going to have the problem because the problem's rooted in technology. The problem's rooted in the problems of capitalism. And if you don't abolish capitalism, you're still going to have this problem. And so eventually, fascism is going to lead to war. And war is the result of an economic crisis. So fascism and war are the natural direction that capitalism goes in a situation like this. And that's what we're living under right now. Capitalism, 21st century capitalism, is in a long-term economic crisis because of the computer revolution. And it is trying to resolve this crisis with Bonapartist schemes. There are different factions of the capitalist class battling among each other. And the dominant faction, it appears, the World Economic Forum, the Greta Thunberg folks, the Great Reset, their mechanism for trying to stabilize capitalism is fascism. They want to drive down living standards very dramatically. They want to reduce the human population. They want to forcibly reduce consumption very dramatically as a mechanism of trying to save capitalism. And they want a highly controlled economy in order to carry this out. These are the big monopolies. This is what Amazon wants. This is what Walmart wants. This is what ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron want. This is what Bill Gates wants. This is what Jeff Bezos wants. This is what Mark Zuckerberg wants. This is what Twitter, what those folks want. This is what Google wants. This is what the ultra rich want. And there's resistance against them by the lower level capitalists. There are various lower level capitalists, fracking companies, industrialists, manufacturers who, they're not communists or socialists, but they want to see their profits go up. And they know that if they start imposing heavy controls on production, they will lose out. They won't be protected. The big monopolies will be protected. They won't be. And so we're seeing a push and pull between different factions of the ruling class that are fighting against each other amid a long-term economic crisis. However, and this is the final bit of analysis that is very important, you'll notice China doesn't have these problems. China has seen a huge amount of technological leaps in China. Their computer revolution has happened over there. They're making smartphones. They got smartphones. They got the internet. They got, technological leaps, but they're not seeing more unemployment. In fact, living standards in China are going up. You'll notice that Russia doesn't have these problems. Russia, They have a computer revolution over there, but Russians aren't getting poorer. Russia's agricultural sector has just rebooted. They've now had the biggest harvests in history. Their industries have expanded. They have more industry now than the time of the Soviet Union. They don't have these problems. Cuba doesn't have these problems. Cuba has trouble because they import a lot of their food and such, but because the computer revolution isn't screwing up their economy. Nicaragua doesn't have these problems. Nicaragua's economy is very strong, and their micro entrepreneurship program is lifting people out of poverty. They're doing okay. Iran doesn't have these problems. Why not? Because there is an alternative economy emerging around the world that's not capitalist. And it's not capitalist because profits are not in command. There is a big market sector in all those countries. There's a big market sector. A lot of private companies making lots of profits, a lot of wealthy people, etc. But profits are not in command. You have a state, a government that controls the means of production. Production is forced to work in the interest of society. You have a state that controls and heavily controls the economy. And because of that, they don't have the ongoing problem of overproduction. They don't have the tendency of the rate of profits to fall. The government tells private corporations what to do, forces private corporations to work in the interest of the state. The banking sector tends to be controlled by the government. The major industries and major natural resources and energy corporations are controlled by the state. The state in China has 5-year economic plans. In Vietnam, they have their socialist-oriented market economy. They also have 5-year economic plans. And production is not carried out on the basis of what's profitable for capitalists. Rather, production is carried out based on what the state, the government, says must be done. And in China, that government is a representative of, it's a 90 million member organization called the Communist Party of China. And in Nicaragua, that government is a representative of this organization called the FSLN, the Sandinista National Liberation Front. And these governments that have roots among a well-organized population, they control the means of production. And this government that is well embedded among the population, that represents mass organizations of the people, controls the means of production. And is it super democratic and free and open? Not necessarily. Do these people have the same level of freedom of speech as we have? No, and that's a problem. Do these people have the same level of freedom of assembly that we have? No, and that's a problem. But they're not capitalist because production is not organized for profit. Production is centrally planned. The economy is not operating based on what's profitable in the short term for capitalists. Rather, you have a state that controls the means of production. And as a result, that state can oversee long-term growth because it's not held back by the irrationality of the market. And that is the West crashing and burning. The West is crashing and burning because we have a capitalist economy, because we are in a period of capitalist decline because of the problem of overproduction and the tendency of the rate of profits to fall. Now, all of this analysis, I just spent, about 50 minutes explaining all of this to you. This is all important. And you've heard it all before if you listen to these streams, but it's really important because this is what Marxism and communism is about. And this is why China, despite having a huge market sector, is a socialist country. This is why Vietnam, despite having a huge market sector, is a socialist country. This is why Norway and Sweden, despite having socialist parties in power, despite having big welfare states and free healthcare and free education, are not socialist countries. They're capitalist. Capitalism is when production is organized for profit. Socialism is when the economy is forced to work in the interests of society overall, and growth is no longer held back by the irrationality of the market. And this is what you need to understand. Now, that leads me to a few things I want you all to talk about. I want to talk about with you all tonight. During the 1930s, there was a big crisis of overproduction in the United States. There was mass unemployment. People were hungry and starving. And there was this group called the Communist Party. And the Communist Party, at one point, it was up to about 90,000 members, almost 100,000 members. But, it represented far more than that. You could only be a member of the Communist Party if you gave the whole of your life to the struggle. It was very demanding to be a member. Many people were not in the Communist Party, but were in labor unions the Communist Party had built. They were in unemployed associations the Communist Party had built. They were in anti-fascist associations, anti-racist groups the Communist Party had built, women's rights organizations that the Communist Party had built. The Communist Party had millions of Americans that were behind them and in their camp. And the Communist Party was this mass organization, and Roosevelt entered an alliance with them. And they arranged very amazing popular reforms to be created: Social Security, unemployment insurance. The reason they're those jobs in steel mills and auto plants and meat packing facilities, the reason industrial jobs used to be good jobs is because the Communist Party built these huge labor unions. They built these huge labor unions that had a lot of power, and those jobs, those workers had union contracts. They got union wages. The Communist Party was a massive organization, and it had millions of members. And Roosevelt was very close to the Communist Party, so much so that Roosevelt said Stalin was a friend of his. He liked Stalin. And in his final State of the Union speech, Roosevelt proposed an economic bill of rights to guarantee all Americans the right to jobs, the right to health care, the right to education. But after the Second World War, the USA had a booming economy. And then the U.S. government viciously destroyed the Communist Party with McCarthyism. And there was a booming economy, and Americans didn't feel sympathetic to communism anymore because the economy was good, because half the world had been destroyed. The crisis of overproduction had been eliminated, and the global economy started speeding ahead again, and people weren't unemployed and hungry anymore, and they were afraid of the Cold War and the Soviet Union, and they had this new brainwashing device called the television that everyone watched and was convinced the Soviet communists were going to come kill them all. And so the Communist Party was forcibly destroyed by the American government. Later, there were divisions among the ruling class, and McCarthyism, the mass anti-communism that had been used to break apart the Communist Party, McCarthyism became a problem because members of the middle class, lower-level capitalists, were accusing rich and powerful capitalists of being communists. The U.S. Army was accused of being communist. The McCarthyism and the anti-communism prevented the United States from making an alliance with Yugoslavia against the Soviet Union, and it was causing a big problem. And because of the fact that the black community was facing, Jim Crow segregation, many black people were sympathetic to communism. And Stalin was constantly talking about how black people in America were oppressed. And many African Americans became sympathetic to communism because they felt like the American government was against them and Stalin was on their side. And on top of that, the Soviet Union was gaining a lot of influence in Africa, and they would show pictures of the lynchings and the mutilated bodies of black people in America, and that would make people in Africa hate the United States. And so there was a section of the American government that said this McCarthyism stuff is out of control. We got to stop the McCarthyism, and we got to get rid of Jim Crow segregation in the South because it's a stain on the American, public, and it's making black people sympathetic to communism. Black people feel like second-class citizens, and they're sympathetic with communism. So a section of the ruling class decided that they wanted to negotiate with the Soviet Union, and rather than escalating an arms race with the Soviet Union, they wanted to infiltrate the Soviet Union and try to infiltrate the Soviet Union and put liberal, reformist, non-communist ideology into the Soviet Union. And they also said that they were going to start to improve the lives of African Americans, so the black community wouldn't be sympathetic to communism, so they could show the world that they weren't hypocrites when they talked about human rights, etc. So one section of the ruling class started supporting the civil rights movement and started, trying to de-escalate the arms race. One section of the ruling class didn't want to escalate the Vietnam War and thought it was a bad idea to escalate the Vietnam War. We know Kennedy was assassinated. John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and there were big divisions in the ruling class. And as a result of there being big divisions in the ruling class, even though the U.S. economy was booming during the 1960s, which it was. The economy was really good. The U.S. economy during the 1960s was booming. Even though the U.S. economy was booming, the black people were not getting their fair share of it, and they were angry about being second-class citizens. And there was a section of the ruling class that didn't want to escalate the Vietnam War. There were many kids, of middle class origin who didn't want to get shot in Vietnam because they'd lived a kind of coddled middle class existence. And so you had an upsurge of protests. There were divisions in the ruling class, and you had a protest movement, a civil rights movement, an anti-Vietnam War movement. And that caused huge divisions within the ruling class. Like the CIA was kind of covertly supporting, the synthetic left and the hippie counterculture, MK Ultra, but then the FBI was very much opposed to it, and COINTELPRO, and the ruling class were fighting among each other. And as a result of that, you had a layer of younger people that got interested in communism. Among the black people, you had the Black Panther Party. Among, young people, you had Students for a Democratic Society, which started out as an anti-communist liberal organization, but later it kind of degenerated into a, what do you want to call it? Not degenerated, but, it changed into a radical organization. Many of these young people that had just been marching with the peace sign, eventually they were waving the flag of the Vietnamese, waving pictures of Mao. So you had a layer of millions of young people. I think they did a poll at one point, like 1969. They did a poll how many Americans thought that, that a communist revolution would be a good thing. And about 2 million Americans said that they would prefer a communist revolution. That's a lot of people. It wasn't a majority. It was a small section of the U.S. public, but 2 million people said they would prefer communism. You had a layer of younger people who became interested in communism. And that layer of young people, the ones who were serious about it, they went to China and they studied what Mao was doing in China. And they went to Cuba and they studied what Fidel Castro was doing in Cuba. They went to Vietnam. They studied what the Vietnamese communists were doing. And they realized that the new left wasn't going to cut it. And they also realized that the old Soviet Communist Party, the Soviet-aligned Communist Party, CPUSA, was lame and ineffective. They weren't going to do it either. So they set out to build a new communist party in America. And there was a whole generation of many tens of thousands of people, probably hundreds of thousands of people, who realized that the new left, the hippie stuff, that was not the way of the revolution. But instead, the way of the revolution was to build working class organizations, to go get jobs in factories, to go and try and build a mass communist party. And they cut their hair. They had short hair, but they cut their hair. They got jobs in factories, and they formed a variety of different communist organizations. They're called the New Communist Movement, the NCM, the New Communist Movement. And they fractured into many different groups. There was the Communist Labor Party. There was the Communist Workers' Party. There was the Revolutionary Communist Party. There was the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist, also called the October League. There was many different groups. But they were all trying to form a new communist party. But the U.S. economy was still too strong. And then in about 1978, you had the first major economic downturn. You had a big economic downturn that happened in 1978 when Jimmy Carter was president. And so these groups got desperate. They said, we've been doing this for almost 10 years now. But now the economy is finally crashing. Now the working class is finally going to listen to us. And so they started doing very desperate things. But ultimately, at that point, the U.S. working class had been seeing their living standard go up since the 1950s. They didn't want to hear it. Average white American workers didn't want to hear it. Among black people, there was some interest. In Detroit, the new communist movement was very successful. A communist judge was elected, and et cetera. But for the most part, most white American workers, their living standard had been going up for so long. Their response to the economic crisis of 1978 was to become more conservative, to go in with Ronald Reagan. And after that, the new communist movement pretty much fell apart, and they all retreated. And communists in America decided you can't organize the masses of Americans. Average Americans are just too racist. Average Americans are just too comfortable and bought off. Average Americans are too patriotic or too stupid or whatever. You can't organize them. And so the left, the communist groups, all retreated from the masses of people. They went to get jobs at colleges and teach gender and queer and race studies. They went to go work in the labor union bureaucracy and be labor union bosses. They went to become Democrats, to just become Democratic Party organizers. They did all kinds of stuff, but they decided you can't organize the masses of Americans. Well, you can. You can't organize the masses of Americans because in 2008, the U.S. economy crashed. Living standards in the United States have significantly decreased, number one. Now, average Americans are open. They're more opposed to the wars than ever before. And on top of that, Americans are more racially integrated than before. The racism that was a big part of why the white working class rejected the new communist movement, that's not the case anymore. We are a more integrated society than we've ever been, and that's a good thing. I mean, all throughout middle America, you have white people and black people, but you don't just have white people and black people. You have people from India, you have people from the Middle East, you have people from South America. The U.S. society is not racially segregated in the way it once was. And so that racism that was a big part of the white working class, it's been broken down. Most people in the white working class have a non-white person who's married into their family at this point. And especially in lower income white working class neighborhoods, they're more racially integrated than ever before. On top of that, living conditions are going down very, very dramatically. So average Americans are against the wars. Average Americans know that the government is run by a group of rich people who doesn't give a fuck about them and is ready to send them off to die in a new war. Average working people want jobs and healthcare and education. Average working class Americans are ready to fight back. But the communists have decided, no, we tried this in 1972. It didn't work. The communist groups are all led by these boomers who have decided, oh no, we can't do it. It didn't work. We tried it back in 1972. It didn't work. Well, things are very different. The U.S. economy has gone way downhill since 1972. Number one, racial integration is not what it was. Things have changed. Things have completely changed. However, now there is a revival of this fake leftism that is being fomented by the ruling class as a mechanism of fascism, a mechanism for driving down living standards. And it's being fomented by the ruling class. And right now, the urgent necessity is for the average working class Americans who are seeing their living standards go down, seeing their wages go down, who don't support these wars. The urgent necessity is for communists to become their leaders. It's for communists to lead them in opposing the lockdowns, in opposing the new wars, opposing the cuts in their wages, opposing the environmental degrowth crap, demanding jobs and healthcare and the rebuilding of infrastructure. Communists need to become the leaders of the American working class. And that is why I use the slogan, out of the movement to the masses, out of the movement to the masses, out of the movement to the masses. We need to leave DSA behind. We need to leave the protest cage and the woke crap behind. We need to go to the masses, and we need to become the organizers of the broad masses of people so that when they're mad about their wages going down, when they're mad about opioids destroying their communities, when they're mad about the emerging low-wage police state and the danger of a new world war, they understand that capitalism is the problem, that socialism is the answer. Out of the movement to the masses. That's the slogan. And this is our responsibility. And Lenin made very, very clear, and I always quote Vladimir Lenin on this, but I'll pull it up, that Lenin said it's not our job to try and win over the synthetic left and the fake left that is pro-war and supports the FBI. That's not our job. Rather, this is what Lenin said that our job is. He said, neither we nor anyone else can calculate precisely what portion of the proletariat is going to follow the social chauvinists and the opportunists. This will be revealed only by the struggle, and it will definitely be only decided by the socialist revolution. But we know for certain that the defenders of the fatherland in imperialist war represent only a minority. And therefore, it is our duty, if we wish to remain socialists, to go lower and deeper to the real masses. Let me read it again. It is therefore our duty, if we wish to remain socialists, to go lower and deeper to the real masses. That's what Lenin's saying to do. It's not your job to keep DSA happy. It's not your job to keep the CPUSA happy. Your job is to go lower and deeper to the real masses. This is the whole meaning of the struggle against opportunism. By exposing the fact that the opportunists and the social chauvinists are in reality betraying and selling the interests of the masses, that they are defending the temporary privileges of a minority of workers, that they are the vehicle of bourgeois ideas and influences, that they are really allies and agents of the bourgeoisie, we teach the masses to appreciate their true political interests and to fight for socialism and revolution through all the long and painful vicissitudes of imperialist war and imperialist armistice. The only Marxist line in the world labor movement is to explain to the masses the inevitability and necessity of breaking with opportunism, to educate them for revolution by waging relentless struggle against opportunism, and to utilize the experience of war, not to conceal the utter vileness of national labor politics. So when there's a situation like the danger of war on the horizon, we need to use the war to expose that DSA is the workers' enemy, to expose that PSL is the workers' enemy, to expose that CPUSA is the workers' enemy. That is our job. We should use the war to go lower and deeper to the real masses and organize them against the opportunists. That is our job, right? That go lower and deeper to the real masses, the real average Americans, and mobilize them against the fake socialists, against the social imperialists and the social chauvinists. We're not supposed to join the DSA. We're supposed to go lower and deeper to the real masses and organize them against the DSA. We're not supposed to join the Communist Party USA and accommodate with the Communist Party USA. We're supposed to go lower and deeper to the real masses, to the average Americans, and get them to oppose the CPUSA. Our job is not to try and convince 20-year-old woke teenagers to be better socialists. Our job is to go win the real masses who hate those woke teenagers and hate those woke, destructive, toxic people, to work with us. Our job is to expose the social chauvinists, expose the opportunists by going lower and deeper to the real masses. And the way that I have articulated what Lenin said in 1914 in his essay, Imperialism and the Split in Socialism, as I've said, out of the movement to the masses. Out of the movement to the masses. And that is our responsibility. And what the new communist movement of the 1970s was trying to do, but could not do because of social conditions, we have to do again in our own way, in our own time. And that's why I wanted to highlight this book on this stream. This book, Heavy Radicals, The FBI's Secret War on America's Maoists, the Revolutionary Union and Revolutionary Communist Party from 1968 to 1980. This book is really, really, really important because in the 1970s, there was a group of people who didn't use drugs. They didn't use drugs. They tried to live a very working class life. They got short hair. They worked in factories. And they tried to get out of the movement to the masses and build a mass communist party. And this book is a thorough academic study of what they did from 1968 to 1980, how they did this. And there's a lot of important lessons in reading this book. There's a lot of important lessons. You can see the confusion that they faced. There were many, many important lessons. For example, they were anti-gay. They thought what China thought. They thought that homosexuality is a form of bourgeois decadence. They thought that homosexuality was a disease from capitalism. Well, they were wrong, right? We don't want to we don't want to treat gay people badly. We don't want to accuse gay people of being bourgeois or something like that. But that was how they saw it. Well, they were wrong on that question. There's other things that you can look at. There's many incidents. You can see how they developed. They were trying to do the right thing, and they knew that the hippie counterculture wasn't right? And so they were trying to get to the masses and build a real communist party, and they were trying to go lower and deeper to the real masses. And it didn't work out because the U.S. economy was too strong, and China's politics, they were taking guidance from China, and China's politics were changing, and so it didn't work out. But it was important. It's important to understand. It was important to understand what they did. And that's why I recommend people read this book. Because if we're going to do it in our time, we need to look at what these people did in the 1970s and how they got it wrong and how they struggled. One of the situations that comes up in this book that I have constantly referred to is I have started calling it the Boston trap. Right? This is important history. In 1974, in Boston, they started integrating the public schools. People ever heard of this? Very famous. In Boston, they started integrating the public schools because the schools in the black neighborhoods had lower performance and lower quality than the schools in the white neighborhoods. They started desegregating schools, so they would bus children across town and try to make education equal within Boston. And they started integrating the schools, busing, they called it. Well, there were a lot of white folks in Boston, Irish American white folks, who were racist. And they were racist. And there was no question about it. They were racist. They did not want their kids to go to school with black people. And so they bombed school buses and they attacked people and beat people up. And there was race riots against busing. So what do you do as a communist, right? If you're in favor, you're against racism, obviously, but there's a lot of low-income white working class people that are going out and rioting against busing. What do? What's the answer? And it gets even more complicated because a lot of black nationalists, the Black Panthers, were also against busing. The Black Panthers wanted black schools for black children. They didn't want to integrate black kids with white kids. They wanted black schools. The Nation of Islam, they were against school busing. A lot of black revolutionary groups were also against busing. So that made it complicated. So what do you do? What do you do? What's the answer? Well, different communist groups responded to Boston in 1974 in different ways. One communist organization, the Communist Party USA and the Socialist Workers' Party, they just supported school busing. They said school busing is good. School desegregation is good. They supported busing. Well, what did that say to black nationalists who didn't support busing? What did that say to the Black Panthers who didn't support busing? What did that say to the Nation of Islam who didn't support busing, right? A group of white people is marching saying that you must go to school. Your kids can't go to black schools only. Your kids can only go to schools, with white people. They didn't take kindly to that. Now, the Workers' World Party, they took a different position. They didn't support busing because they recognized there was disagreement about it in the black community. But they also saw that the anti-busing riots were fascist and racist in nature. So they organized a big demonstration called We Say No to Racism. And it was a huge demonstration, not supporting busing, but against the anti-busing riots, against the racist riots. They organized a huge protest called We Say No to Racism. And what did the Revolutionary Communist Party do? The RCP. Well, they supported the racist riots. They said, well, communism is the answer, not busing. So therefore, they supported the racist riots. And they had a headline in their papers, Unite the Working Class to Smash Busing. And the October League, the Maoist, what did they do? Well, they printed articles by black revolutionaries that were opposed to busing. They printed articles from the Nation of Islam and from the Black Panthers that were against busing. How do you deal with a situation like that? Well, here's the problem, right? The Workers' World Party, which I was in for 8 years, they took from the Boston situation that you should never align with the right wing. They looked at the RCP, the Revolutionary Communist Party, and said you should never align with the right wing. If the right wing are being racist and all that, you never align with the right wing. And based on that, they support the liberals. And this is what's called the Boston trap. And this is why PSL will not break with wokeness. PSL is a break from the Workers' World Party. They come out of the Marcy tradition, Sam Marcy. And they learned in 1974, just like everyone learned in 1974, in the 70s, that average Americans can never be won over. The communists of the 1970s learned that you should never support the right wing because they looked at the Revolutionary Communist Party and how they had been pandering to these racists and they looked like fools. So everyone said that as a result of Boston in 1974, you never join with the right wing. That's a huge mistake. It was right in Boston in 1974 to not join with the racist, anti-busing riots, obviously. But you can't project Boston in 1974 to now. Average Americans are against these wars, but the left, the so-called left, is more pro-war than average Americans are. Average Americans don't want their wages to go down. They're tired of seeing their living standard go down. But the left says they deserve to be poorer and they should be poorer because of climate change and reparations and etc. Average Americans don't want a low-wage police state. They don't like the FBI. They don't like Twitter and Facebook telling them what they are and are not allowed to say. They want freedom of speech. They want freedom of assembly. The left supports the FBI and says that if you disagree with them, you're a conspiracy theorist and you need to be jailed and silenced. We should be joining with the right wing right now. Doesn't mean we should agree with their ideology. Doesn't even mean we should agree on a lot of the issues. But the right wing are the ones that are fighting for free speech. The right wing are the ones that are opposing sending more money to Ukraine. The right wing are the ones that are questioning the FBI. The right wing are the ones who are saying Americans shouldn't be poorer. We're not going to adopt right-wing beliefs, but it's clear that the people that are against the state right now, that are against the U.S. imperialists, they're against their wars, they're against their degrowth, they're against their low-wage police state, are on the right. You can't deny that right now. Wokeism is being promoted from the highest levels of the government, from the highest levels of the American government. They're promoting this fake left, synthetic left, degrowth crap, right? That says human beings are a cancer on Mother Earth and we got to drive down the population. It says that, the FBI is a great group defending us from evil Donald Trump. It says we need censorship because if you disagree with the mainstream narrative, you're racist and you should be censored on Twitter. That says that we need these wars because Putin's an evil Nazi. We got to send all these weapons to Ukraine. The right wing is against the American establishment and its activities. And the synthetic left, the so-called left, the opportunists and social chauvinists, they are more pro-war. They are more pro-police state repression. They are more pro-poverty than average Americans are. So it's obvious that if we communists are going to do our job, we need to win over the average Americans who are in favor of higher living standards, who are in favor of opposing these wars, who don't want tech censorship, who don't want a low-wage police state. That's who we should be winning over. And it won't be easy because they have this orientation that everything they don't like is communism. They have this orientation that it's all somehow China's fault. They have this orientation that the answer is free market capitalism. So it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. But that's where we belong. And if you want any more proof of that, there's two things you can point to as proof that the so-called left is completely hopeless. Number one, when Dari Dugina was killed with a bomb, this is a 28-year-old woman, and she was ripped apart with a bomb by Ukrainian intelligence. The U.S. government is whipping up anti-Russia hysteria. It's sending weapons to Nazis in Ukraine to extreme. And then these Nazis murdered a 28-year-old woman who was not a military person. She was not part of the military. And the left celebrated it. It was a lynching. It was a 21st century lynching. Just like crowds of white people used to jump up and down and cheer as a black man's body was dangling from a tree, the woke left, all of them, all the people with rainbow flag emojis, all the people with BLM and their thing, they were jumping up and down cheering that this 28-year-old woman was blown up by a car bomb. They're sick, evil people. I mean, joining with the woke left is joining a lynch mob. You're joining with a crowd of people that celebrated a 28-year-old girl who was not a combatant. She was not involved in anything military. They just said, well, she's a fascist. Why is she a fascist? Whatever. They said she's a fascist. So they celebrated her murder. That's one example of why you can't join with the left. Second example, a group of black revolutionaries called the Uhuru movement. The Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, black socialists, black Marxists, had their homes raided by the FBI. Now, in the 1970s, back in these days, if a group of black socialists had their homes raided by the FBI, all the communist groups would have been out there protesting. They would have all been out there, FBI, leave the movement alone. No more COINTELPRO. They would have all been out there. The Workers' World Party, the Communist Party, and they would have all been out there marching, FBI, leave black revolutionaries alone. They would have remembered what was done to Martin Luther King Jr. They would have remembered what was done to the Black Panthers. They would have been against it. That is not what happened. A lot of the communist groups didn't even say anything about it. And some of them supported it. Vosh, on his stream, he lied. And he said that they were the same as Black Hammer and that they deserved it. And all of them, all of the fake socialists supported the FBI going after a group of black revolutionaries, flying drones into their houses, pointing guns in their faces, calling them Russian agents. All of the fake woke left supported it. All of them. So at that point, we have to recognize that more than ever, what Lenin said is correct. We need to get out of the movement to the masses. Kim Iverson is more of a communist than these communist groups are. Kim Iverson is a conservative, but she had Chairman O'Malley on her show to talk about how the government is going after a group of black revolutionaries. The Center for Political Innovation, we had them. We hosted them. Conservatives support the African People's Socialist Party more than the so-called left does. So out of the movement to the masses is the urgent necessity of our time. If there's ever been a time to say out of the movement to the masses, it's now. The woke left is the new fascism. They want to solve the capitalist crisis with degrowth, and that's what fascism is. Fascism is not aesthetics. That is not what fascism is. Fascism is not uniforms. Fascism is not salutes. Fascism is not even rhetoric. Fascism is a way of trying to save the capitalist system by grinding into poverty and preparing for war. And that is what the woke left is doing. They openly want to grind the world into poverty. They are for degrowth. They want to impoverish people. They want to set up a low-wage police state. That's what they want. They want to silence dissidents. They support the FBI raiding the homes of black revolutionaries. They supported Ukrainian Nazis murdering Dari Dugina. They are psyching up the population for World War III with Russia. They want to outlaw and silence voices on social media that are critical of the American status quo. They support the FBI. The left are the fascists. And it doesn't matter. Yeah, they're not racial. They're not preaching racial supremacism. That's because this is the 21st century. The essence of fascism is not racism. Mussolini, he wasn't espousing racial stuff. The essence of fascism is not racism. The essence of fascism is not boots and military uniforms. The essence of fascism you can find in this book, Fascism and Social Revolution. The essence of fascism is capitalism in decay, and setting up a low-wage police state and grinding the population into poverty in order to save capitalism. It's a form of Bonapartism. It is capitalism in decay. And it's very clear who the fascists are. The fascists in our time are the woke left. That is who the fascists are. And we need to sit at the center of a united front against the imperialists. Anyone in U.S. society who is against what the big monopolies are doing. They're against what Bill Gates is doing. They're against what Amazon is doing. They're against what the big oil companies are doing. They're against what the FBI is doing. They're against the new wars. We need to be building a united front. A united front against the imperialists. That's what we need to be doing. And the Americans who want to see their living standards go up, the Americans who don't want the FBI and Twitter and Facebook to tell them what they are and are not allowed to say, the Americans who don't want a new world war, they don't want thousands of Americans coming back from Ukraine in body bags. They don't want to see a nuclear exchange between great powers. They don't want, young kids from Iowa and Kansas and Pennsylvania and Kentucky to come home in body bags after getting shot in the Straits of Taiwan. That's who we need to be uniting with. The Americans who oppose the woke left, who oppose the degrowth fascism, who oppose the New World War. That is who we need to be uniting. And that is our responsibility in this time. We must unite those who are opposed to the imperialists. We must build a united front against the imperialists. That is our job. And ultimately, many people across America are going to realize that it would be in America's interest to have a better relation with Russia, better relation with China, better relation with Cuba, better relation with Venezuela. And that if we joined this alternative economy, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Eurasian Economic Union, the BRICS, the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America, if we joined this alternative economy that is arising from around the world, America could be a much more prosperous country. We could build high-speed railway across this country. We could build new power plants and bridges. We could raise living standards. We could have a better education system. We could once again have the smartest engineers and scientists in the world. We could rebuild communities. We could rebuild crumbling infrastructure. We could have an education system that was good. We could eliminate poverty. We could have health care and jobs for all Americans. The rebirth of the United States could be carried out if we had a government of action that fights for working families. A government of action. Right now, we've been told, the government's just got to sit back and, just let things get worse. No, we need a government of action. A government of action to take strong, dramatic action to stabilize the crisis. Not a government that forces down wages, not a government that starts a new world war, but a government that wages war against poverty, that wages war against unemployment, that wages war against homelessness and hopelessness and depression. A government that builds high-speed railway and power plants and new hospitals and new industries. A government that mobilizes the next generation to go out and construct and build a whole new country. A government that says it's their responsibility to make the population smarter, not to make them stupider. A government that gives every young American a purpose and mobilizes the population to build this country up from nothing. A government of action. A government of action that fights for working families. That is what we need in the United States. We need high-speed railway. We need to revamp and get the space program going once again. We need a government that is building schools and hospitals and education that's feeding people. We need a government that gives jobs, not jails. We need a government that isn't building a low-wage prison and trying to wipe out the population and carefully destroy the population. We need a government that mobilizes to build America up, to build bridges of cooperation with China, bridges of cooperation with Russia and with South America and with all the countries around the world. That's what we need. A government of action that fights for working families, that gives youth a future, that gives the older generation economic security, that makes the whole country into a place that would be prosperous, that anyone would be happy to grow up in and raise a family in. And that's what we need. A government of action to fight for working families. And we need to be at the center of a united front to build that government of action. And that would include the labor unions, the working class, the proletariat would be the biggest faction, the biggest section of that united front. But they wouldn't be the only one. There would probably be a lot of middle-class people, small business owners who want to see their neighborhoods rebuilt, who want to see new hospitals and schools and jobs and education. There would even be some very wealthy capitalists who aren't part of the club with the Rockefellers and the DuPonts and the Carnegies and the Morgans. They're not in with the big bankers. And they also want to see the country rebuilt. And they also want to get along with China and get along with Russia. We need to build a united front. If you look at the Chinese flag, on the Chinese flag, they have a big star and it stands for the Communist Party. And then they have 4 other stars. And that stands for the block of 4 great classes that the Communist Party led, a block of 4 classes. And that was the poor peasants, the middle peasants, the proletariat, the working class, and the national capitalists. It was a block of 4 great classes, 4 stars, but led by one big star, led by the Communist Party. And it was a block against the imperialists, a block of 4 great classes to free China from the imperialists. But the Communist Party was leading it because only they had the ideology and the understanding of why China had been kept poor. Only they had the ideology with which to lead the block of 4 great classes. With their proletarian ideology, they led the block of 4 great classes that created a new China. Well, we need to build a block of many great classes and many great people, an anti-imperialist block in America to defeat the imperialists, to defeat Amazon, to defeat Walmart, to defeat ExxonMobil and BP and Shell and Chevron and Google and Facebook and all the Silicon Valley fascists and all the big oil monopolies and low-wage bankers and fascists and degrowthers. All the people grinding this country into poverty, reducing the United States into just one outpost in their open international system, grinding the world into poverty. We must build a united front in America, a block of all different classes against the imperialists. That is our duty in this time. We must build a block to defeat the imperialists. The imperialists, the big corporations, the globalists, the monopolies that are leading this country into war, that are grinding this country into poverty and a low-wage police state. We must build a united front against the imperialists. That is our duty in this time. And I hope that this, has not been too repetitive. I know I say this kind of stuff on my streams a lot. I like to talk to you about different things, UFOs and Kamala Harris and movies and all of that. But this is the central message that I'm getting out to people. I'm writing a new book all on this very topic. It's almost done. It'll be ready before our next upcoming conference. But this is what we need. We need a government of action. A government of action to fight for working families. And in order to get there, we must build a united front against the imperialists. That is what we must do. And it is the urgent necessity of our time. Woke fascism must be defeated. And we must build a united front against the imperialists. That is what we must do. And we got to scream this message from the heavens. So I guess I'll end my opening remarks by making a few business announcements. First things first. February 19th in Washington, D.C. February 19th, we are going to we're the Center for Political Innovation. We are official sponsors of this very important anti-war rally that is taking place. It's a really, really important anti-war rally, February 19th. A very important event on February 19th. It's a really big anti-war rally. We are official sponsors of it. And after that event, right afterwards, very close to where the rally is ending, we are having a public event, an after party. There's going to be food there. There'll be free food for people who come, and we're going to have a rally in DC, like an indoor conference on socialism right after the February 19th rally. It's going to be at a hotel in Washington, D.C. And pretty soon we're going to have it so you can register on the website. And, and then people from the rally will be invited to go to it. And it's going to be really important. So if you're going to be able on February 19th to go to Washington, D.C., you ought to go to this really important anti-war rally called by the Libertarian Party, called by the People's Party, called by Code Pink and World Against War and so many important groups. You need to go to that rally. And then afterwards, you need to come to the CPI reception. We're probably going to theme it around how can we stop World War III. We're going to theme it around that, and we'll have a poster for the event and stuff. I'm heading to DC next week, or not next week. I'm heading to DC in 2 days to make sure that the hotel and everything's in place. That's February 19th. We need you there. You need to come. You'll get to listen to me give a speech in person. You get to hear some great music that's going to be played. It's going to be awesome. So we need you there in DC, February 19th. Go to the very important anti-war protest. And then afterwards, come party with the CPI and listen to some great speeches and music. It's going to be awesome. So that's the first thing. The second thing we need is March 25th and 26th. The CPI is sponsoring a very important conference in Washington, D.C. I cannot tell you too much about that. We will be making a public announcement soon, but I can't say much about it. But March 25th and 26th, we're going to have a very important anti-imperialist event in Washington, D.C. It'll be a 2-day conference that we're having in D.C. So we need you at that as well. And that's what we need. So, if you are an anti-imperialist, we need you to do that. And we need you to do that. And if you want to help our effort, you want to help us in doing what we're doing, building this united front against the imperialists, fighting for a government of action, you ought to become a member of the Center for Political Innovation. I just laid out our worldview. And our worldview is rooted in Marxism, but it's so much more than that. We're not just dogmatic Marxists throwing the red book at people. Many of us are Christians. We draw from the Bible. Many of us are from the global anti-imperialist tradition. We study, we educate, we have a diversity of views. We're not a party. We're an educational project that is doing socialist education around the country. You ought to join the CPI. You ought to join the Center for Political Innovation. We'd love to have you. You ought to become a dues-paying member. So you can join us. And if you like the work that this channel is doing, you can always sign up on the Patreon. The Patreon is just for supporters supporting this channel. It's not supporting the CPI. It's supporting this YouTube channel. But if you want to support the work that we're doing, that's great as well. There you go. So that's the link there. So I just wanted to say that. And I mean, that's what I'm about, that's what I'm about. And, we must defeat the imperialists, and that out of the movement to the masses, 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 out of the movement to the masses. I am not interested in recruiting the DSA. I am not interested in recruiting the woke hipster kids on the internet who celebrated the death of Dari Dugina. I am not interested in recruiting the Vosh fans. Out of the movement to the masses. The masses of America are against these wars. The masses of Americans are against degrowth. The masses of Americans are against the low-wage police state. They want their free speech back. They want the right to say what they want to say. They don't want the FBI to terrorize them. They're against the FBI. And we got to be with the average Americans. Average Americans are tired of the direction the country is moving in. And we got to be with average Americans against the low-wage police state, not with the socialists who support it, right? Not with the PSL, not with the CPUSA. We must stop World War III. That is what we must do. Or Gavin in the chat here, he's calling it woke war 3. Yeah, and he's right. That is what we must do. And it is our responsibility to be with the broad masses of people against woke fascism and against the danger of a new world war. So those are my opening remarks for tonight. Now, before I do the roll call, I thought I would put some music on because, I enjoy communist music. I really do. There's one communist composer that I've always enjoyed. His name was Cornelius Cardew. And Cornelius Cardew, he was like a famous British experimental composer. He was a famous British experimental composer. And he, he became a communist. And so he started composing what he called people's liberation music. And it was communist themed music. And it's hilarious. I enjoy it with my tongue in my cheek because the lyrics are so kind of over the top and political. I'm kind of laughing at myself when I listen to the lyrics of Cornelius Cardew's music. But the message is overall a correct one about how capitalism is leading to fascism and war, about what socialism is all about. So I thought I would just play a Cornelius Cardew song. This is called "We Sing for the Future." We'll play that, then we'll do the roll call, and then I'll start answering super chat questions. So if you have any more super chats, send them my way. This is one of Cornelius Cardew's most beloved songs. I enjoy it. The lyrics are pretty wild. This is called "We Sing for the Future."
In utter chaos, the old order spews out unlimited decadence and parasitism. It's a disaster to mankind and fights against progress with unprecedented ferocity. Stricken by all kinds of sickness, the system's in all-sided crisis with economic at the base, spiritual and cultural devastation. The crisis is social and political too. In the midst of this dying out world, the proletariat of all lands are fighting. The oppressed in their millions are rising, demanding their social and national liberation. Genuine Marxists, Leninists on a world scale are organizing to end the old world. We sing for the future, proletarians of all lands. We unite and fight together for revolution and socialism. We sing for the future, proletarians of all lands. We unite and fight together for the victory of communism.
Paris Commune was the signal of coming revolutionary storms and victory of Marxism. October Revolution brought Leninism to the workers, established the first proletarian state. New civilization has come into being. The guns of Aurora so boldly proclaimed. Socialism is the inevitable next stage. It will prevail all over the globe. No refrain about the old world, no illusion about the past, for it will look to the future of toilers under the banner of Marxism-Leninism. This is the future for all mankind, a future devoid of all class oppression. There will be no place in this new world for imperialism, social imperialism, or all reaction. We sing for the future, proletarians of all lands. We unite and fight together for revolution and socialism. We sing for the future, proletarians of all lands. We unite and fight together for the victory of communism.
Come join with us, all the youth of our land. Come join all the toilers who refuse to be slaves. Come all who fight for the forward march, for the brilliant future of communism. We bring with us from the past what is purest, the sentiment for the liberation of man. And from today we take Marxism, Leninism, revolutionary struggles of the workers of all lands. Our revolution is based on the proletariat, the only thoroughly revolutionary class. Proletariat is a grave digger of the bourgeoisie and all exploiting systems. Our songs are songs of proletarian struggle, of revolution and sacrifice. Come one and all and sing for the future. The victory of revolution is on the horizon. We sing for the future, proletarians of all lands. We unite and fight together for revolution and socialism. We sing for the future, proletarians of all lands.
righty. That was the great Cornelius Cardew. And like I said, the lyrics are a bit cringe, and I enjoy them with my tongue in my cheek. So let's do the roll call. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. After I do the roll call, then I will answer the super chat questions. So we got Alan in Chicago. Welcome, Alan. Very, very good. We got Bradley in St. Louis, Nate in Chicago, Anthony in Detroit. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Billy Gateshead, England, Rice from Adelaide, Australia, Rupert Fellows, Danny in Boston, Patrick in Portland, Tony in Tasmania, Yada Yisrael, Kieran from San Diego, Steve in Boston, George in Sydney, David in Grass Valley, St. David's, Bermuda, Ryan Clark in the Cheese Caves, St. David's, Bermuda, Nina here in your head. There you go. Are you here or are you just in my head? Cleveland Pirate Alex, Colin in Greensboro, Patch in Arizona, Mark Foster, Bob Troy in New York, Oakland, California, Joey in Wellington, New Zealand. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Jennifer Ruth from Alabama the Beautiful says hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, everybody. Carl in Washington. Welcome, Carl. How you doing, Carl? Good to see you, Carl. Anthony in Fort Worth, Texas. Welcome, Anthony. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Fred Tan likes Cornelius Cardew's music. Tyler is in Missouri, and he's still here. I thought you were going to bed, Tyler. I'm glad you're still with us. You're awesome. John McCarthy's in Chicago. John McCarthy is dedicated. He's worked so hard in support of the African People's Socialist Party. My hat is taken off to him. I'm not wearing a hat, but if I did, I would take it off to you, John, because you're working hard around an important case. We got Anthony in Fort Worth, Texas. Micah in Las Vegas. Zachary Brunch. There we go. There we go. There we go. Briggy in Pennsylvania is with us. Hi, Carl. BH in NYC. Jamie is here in St. Paul. Good stuff. Very, very, very good. Anyone else? Names and locations. Jamie here in St. Paul. Boris and Gary. Brunch is a good meal. Excellent. Excellent stuff. Good times, folks. Good times. Good times. Oh, goodness. Anybody else with us? Sam in Springfield, Missouri. Dylan in Seattle. Mr. Wonderful from Kiwanis. Very, very good. Very, very good. Tyler says, hanging on. Kids are falling asleep to Paw Patrol. These cartoon dogs are keeping me awake. There you go. There you go. There you go. There you go. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, folks. I've got a few super chats. If you have stuff you want me to talk about, there you go. Now, the first super chat question I got is someone asked, what's the best way to recommend a video reaction? Well, you can email me or something like that. I just didn't know what the video was. And I mean, I'm not going to set up a precedent where you can just send me a video and I just put it on. Sometimes I will do that depending on what the video is, but it just depends. So if you want to email it to me, that would be great. If you want to send me a message about it, that would be fine. But I'm not necessarily, just because you super chat a video, going to put it on the screen. That could lead to disaster. Think about it. That could lead to disaster, right? Just like we got to be careful. I mean, you never know what might happen on these streams, right? I do the thing sometimes where I open these streams up and let people come on. We'll probably do that again soon, but we got to be careful. You just got to be careful sometimes. But there you go. Thoughts on market socialism in Yugoslavia? Well, so in Yugoslavia, Tito was the leader of socialist Yugoslavia. In 1948, he became the first socialist country to cut ties with the Soviet Union. 1948, you had, the leader of socialist Yugoslavia, Tito, denounced Stalin, and they cut ties, and, that was a big deal. Now, Tito, after cutting ties with the Soviet Union, started implementing policies he called worker self-management, where he made every factory like a collective farm. For those of you who may not know, in the Soviet Union, the factories were all state-run. However, the farms were largely what they called collective farms, meaning that they sold their produce to the state, right? That they got paid for how much they produced, and the government bought, if there was a wheat farm, the government bought their wheat at a set rate. If it was a dairy farm, it bought the milk at a set rate, right? That's generally how it was done. Thoughts on Marshall McLuhan and the Toronto School of Communication Theory? My friend, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. So I can't give you thoughts on something if I don't know what it is. I'm sorry. I don't know everything. I know many people watch these streams and think I know everything. I know many people hate me because they think I'm just so smart. How can he be so smart? Curse him, curse him. Well, I don't know what that is. I don't know everything, and that I do not know. But they made every factory autonomous. It was a tire factory. They would produce the tires, and then the government would buy the tires at a fixed rate. And this was called worker self-management, where the factory was autonomous, but it sold its goods to the government. That was the idea. And the idea was that it was more socialist, more communist than the Soviet Union. But what it actually led to was decentralization, because Yugoslavia, as you'll remember, Yugoslavia is a number of different countries, right? It was many, many different Slavic countries. There's many different nationalities: Serbia, Macedonia, Croatia, that make up former Yugoslavia. And that Sam Marcy, the founder of the Workers' World Party, he argued that the worker self-management policies of Tito resulted in weakening the unity of the different nationalities that made up Yugoslavia, because the different regions were producing different levels of goods. Some regions had more industry than others. Because of that, some regions had more wealth coming into them than others, because the government was buying goods from specific regions. It was a form of market socialism, and it's still socialism. I don't think it's capitalism. It's still socialism. But Sam Marcy argued that it was a not a good move, because it moved away from the centralization, and it resulted in there being more inequality between the different nationalities and different regions of Yugoslavia. And that helped set the stage for what happened in the 90s, which was the imperialists breaking up Yugoslavia. One of the best books I've ever read on the breakup of Yugoslavia. Is it over here? Do I have it? It's called To Kill a Nation by Michael Parenti. I think I have it. To Kill a Nation. Let me see if I have it. I have it somewhere in my apartment. I don't think I have it on the shelf behind me. If I did, I would pull it out, but I don't. Yeah, it's called To Kill a Nation by Michael Parenti. It's a very, very good book on the overthrow of socialism in Yugoslavia and how it was done. And I really recommend To Kill a Nation by Michael Parenti. Do I have that here? Yes, I do. Here it is. Here it is. To Kill a Nation: The Attack on Yugoslavia. It's a very good book. It's a very good book documenting how the imperialists broke up the former Yugoslavia. And my feeling, and Sam Marcy's analysis was that the factory autonomy and the worker self-management that was part of the market socialism in Yugoslavia contributed to the fall of Yugoslavia by playing different nationalities against each other. And I feel like that is correct. I could be wrong. I have been wrong about many things before in my life. And I wasn't there. I've never been to Yugoslavia. But based on the reading that I have done, the analysis that I have read generally argues that market socialist policies in China have been very, very effective. In Vietnam, they've been very, very effective. But in the context of the Cold War and then the context of the 1990s, they actually weakened socialism in Yugoslavia. That is my understanding. Alrighty. And I believe I used to have, there's a book that contains Sam Marcy's analysis of this. And I wish I could pull that book out right now. I don't seem to have it here, but there is a book that's called like NATO in the Balkans or something like that. And it has a number of different essays about the breakup of former Yugoslavia. And it includes name a sermon or hymn that really speaks to you. Very good. Will do. That I can do, Gavin. Or a hymn that really speaks to you. All right. All right. The current attitude of the Chinese Communist Party toward religion. That's a good one. That's the next question I've got here. That's a really good one. And I would actually like to recommend, if you want to know, the view of the Chinese Communist Party on religion has really changed. And I actually wrote an article about this for Mint Press. And it goes into great detail. It's called China's Strategy in the War on Terror, Jobs Not Drones. And it talks about how in Tibet, there was Buddhist separatist terrorism going on. And in the Uyghur regions, there was Islamic separatist terrorism going on, and how the Chinese government fought against it. But from there, in this article, and I'm posting it in the chat, I go into great detail because during the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese Communist Party was vicious to religious people. Like, I mean, during the Cultural Revolution, they forced that, priests and nuns were forced to get married. Oh, that's good. They forced priests and nuns to get married. They mobilized the Red Guard youth, used to go out and smash temples and religious sites. And during the period of the Cultural Revolution in China, religion was very viciously persecuted. But then, and this is really interesting, and I talk about it in the article. I actually cite, when you're writing something, you can't just say something off the top of your head. You got to cite your source. There was actually a document published by the Chinese Communist Party in 1982, and it's called The Basic Viewpoint and Policy on the Religious Question During Our Country's Socialist Period. And it's more commonly referred to as Document 19. And that was when the Chinese Communist Party reversed its position on religion. And now the policy of the Chinese Communist Party is one of, they say, respect for and protection of freedom of religious belief is one of their most important things. And in 2016, President Xi Jinping urged the Communist Party of China to, quote, dig deep into the doctrines and canons that are in line with social harmony and progress and favorable for the building of a healthy civilized society, and interpret religious doctrines in a way that are conducive to modern China's progress and in line with our excellent traditional culture. Meaning that the line of the Chinese Communist Party now is to find things in Christianity, find things in, I missed a super chat. What super chat did I miss? I'm scrolling up here. Find things in religion, find things in religions that are in line with the Chinese Communist Party's vision for the country. Oh, Kieran from San Diego. Thank you. Find things that are in line with the Chinese Communist Party and its vision for the country, and also find things that are in line with traditional Chinese culture and uphold them. They're not at war with religion any longer, right? They are in favor of religion. They're in favor of religion, and they want to find ways that there can be harmony between the Chinese Communist Party and religion. So there you go. All right. Agenda 21 and 2030. Can you explain how the UN and its Rockefeller origin, the land that the United Nations is built on, was donated by the Rockefellers? That's true. And, you go to the UN, there's a huge building right next to the UN. I used to work in the UN building. I was in the press building, and every day on my way to work, I would walk from the train and I would walk by this huge building. It's called the Ford Foundation. They got like a forest inside, the Ford Foundation building. It's like, it's like there's a court. It looks like an indoor forest in the middle of it. And the Ford Foundation is right there by the UN and the Asia Society. And yeah, the Rockefeller think tanks are all over the United Nations and the UN, all of the NGO culture, all of the degrowth, social planning, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller think tanks, that those folks are all over the United Nations crafting policy. right? That's a really big part of the role that these NGOs and the UN plays. And they get together and have meetings about why, overpopulation is an issue and why, the UN is a very evil institution. And, there is a Security Council, that is part of it, that obviously Russia and China have permanent seats on. That's an interesting one. And so the UN is, it's not completely bad, right? It is kept, from doing really, really bad things. Russia and China are kind of an anchor keeping the UN in its place. But a lot of what the UN does around the world is very evil. And, Matthew, there's a guy, Matthew Russell Lee. He's a reporter. And he's a UN reporter, and they've kicked him out of the UN, but he's reporting there for years. And he's just dedicated himself to exposing all the corruption, all the scandals the UN is involved in. The UN, the amount of scandals and corruption, the UN Relief Works Agency and what the UN does in Africa. It's just, the UN is just a pile of corruption. The world kind of knows this. It's just something that everyone just kind of recognizes. Yeah, that's true, and just kind of moves on. But yeah, the UN really, it isn't great. Let me just put it that way. The idea that they want to drive down the population, they want social engineering. Yeah, the Rockefeller think tanks and all of that are very embedded there, doing what they got to do. All right, next question. How can we get right-wingers to see that the World Economic Forum and China are not both, who think that, how can we get right-wingers who think that the World Economic Forum and China are both the enemy to support the Belt and Road and oppose the Great Reset? Very good question. And thank you, Stephen, for your super chat. We need to show people what the Chinese Communist Party has done, how they have taken control of the means of production and raised up the living standards of the population, and how that's what they would want. If you ask your average conservative, what would you like to see happen in America? They'd like to see jobs again. They'd like to see the economy growing again. They'd like to see a government that puts the people of this country first and raise up their living standard. That's what China has. And that's what socialism with Chinese characteristics has achieved. And the free market isn't doing that, right? They'd like to see a country that has a market sector, but they'd like to see a government that fights for the American people and that oversaw the economic rebooting of the country. Well, that's what China has. That's what China has. China has that. The Chinese Communist Party has made China great again. They've done it. They've raised millions of people out of poverty. They've wiped out illiteracy. They've industrialized the country. Every day another Chinese person becomes a millionaire. Right? There's many billionaires in China. They build the fastest trains in the world. Wouldn't it be great if America was making the fastest trains in the world? Wouldn't it be great if America had the best cell phone company in the world, the biggest telecommunication? All the things that I feel like a conservative would want for America, the Chinese Communist Party has done in China. So you got to show them that. And it's why is this bad? Right? Why is that bad? That's good, isn't it? Isn't that good? Well, instead of being mad at the Chinese communists and thinking that they're responsible for all this evil globalism, the drive behind this globalism is degrowth. That's the opposite. The Chinese communists have done growth. That's what they're all about, sustainable development, so yeah, it's at odds. The Great Reset and what the Chinese Communist Party do, they don't match. They're complete opposites. So there you go. All right. Thoughts on Lula reestablishing relations with Venezuela? That's great. And it shows that I was right. As much as there are issues with Lula, he's good. Lula da Silva is good. And he was right that the Bolsonaro people are the greater evil. And that Lula, also let's remember there's a bit of a thaw with Washington going on, right? Juan Guaido is out. He's out. Washington is negotiating with Venezuela. And so, Lula's decision comes at a time that there's also a thaw going on in Washington. Washington's not going to come down as hard on him as they might have 3 or 4 years ago. Now, again, he's not in office. He wasn't in office. He just got back into office. So I think it's a good move. And it accompanies overall, the Biden administration is trying to get Venezuela's oil. And that's why Juan Guaido is out. That's why there's some talk of increasing diplomatic relations. And, so things between the USA and Venezuela might slightly improve as a result of the Russia situation and needing their oil. But Venezuela is never going to sell out. I'll tell you that much. The USA has done so much evil to them They're never going to trust the United States. They're never going to like, just, go over the side of the United States. That'll never happen. Never happen. I mean, Venezuela, everything they've been through, all that the people there have gained. I've been to Venezuela. I've seen it. And the people there, they've endured everything. The U.S. imperialists have come down on them so hard, and they've resisted so many coup attempts and so much sanctions. They're never going to surrender. They're not going to sell out. They're not going to join with the United States against Russia. That will never happen. That will never happen. They know who their friends are. They know who their enemies are. So there you go. Name a sermon or a hymn that really speaks to you. I listen to religious music all day long. I'll be honest. I wake up every morning with classical music. I go to sleep with classical music, but I tend to listen to hymns every day. One hymn I really like: my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. I think when I was a kid, my favorite hymn when I was a kid, the one that I liked, I just liked the tune of it, was "Come thou fount of every blessing, and my heart to sing thy praise. Streams of mercy, never seeking, thoughtful songs of loudest praise." I liked that one. "Come thou fount of every blessing." That was my favorite hymn when I was a kid. So there you go. But yeah, and there are certain, I listen to orators all day long. I like public speaking. I really like public speaking. I listen to politicians. I listen to preachers and orators. And yeah, I mean, there's some pastors I really like. I listen to all of their stuff. There's some pastors I don't really care for. Honestly, I really, some of these TV preachers, you can't listen to them. That one guy, what's his name? He's on TV, and he's like the most famous television preacher that I've ever heard of. He's the big one, Joel Osteen. I can't listen to that guy. It's crap. I mean, it's just self-help with a few Bible verses thrown in, and he delivers it all. He's reading from a teleprompter. I am Joel Osteen, and I'm here to tell you that God loves you. I'm going to open with a joke, and then I'm going to tell you to work really hard because it might pay off. And here's a Bible verse about it. And there, I mean, it is the most hokey, crappy. I mean, first of all, it's not Christian, right? I mean, I apologize. It's not Christian, but it's just like, I mean, I'm sorry, but take the Bible verses out of it. It just sounds like, your typical self-help, go out and try really hard in the world. Your work will pay off. Be nice to people, and he just throws some Bible verses into it, and then he delivers it robotically. It's not good speaking. I am reading from a teleprompter, and I'm telling you a series of jokes that my writers wrote for me before I came out here today. I mean, and it's not good oratory, right? Good oratory means you're telling stories, you're engaging your audience, it's not good oratory. It's robotically delivered. And I am a heterosexual man, so I don't know. Women find him very attractive. So maybe that's what gets away with it. People say he's really good looking. He's a cutie or whatever, but I just find it to all just be this, he's got his like slightly longer hair, and he's up there and he's got a good smile, and he's Joel Osteen, and he's up there giving a good smile and reading out of his teleprompter. It's crap. I mean, I find that to be completely worthless. Honestly, I really find that to be completely worthless. Whereas, I mean, some of these preachers that have been around, they really know what they're doing, right? They could give really good oratory. There's a Caribbean pastor here in New York. I listen to her sermons. I'm like, this woman, she would probably disagree with everything I say, but I could listen to her sermons all day long. That woman knows how to preach, right? I'll tell you that. She's here in New York, and she's of Caribbean origin. I think she was born in the Caribbean. And I will turn her live streams on, and I will listen to her, and she knows how to really preach. There's different pastors from around the country that I will listen to, that I find amusing. But a lot of times, I will be honest with you, a lot of what pastors preach is very lightweight. A lot of it is really lightweight. There's not much depth in it. And, and that's why as much as I am Christian in my outlook, I'm not just a pastor, right? I mean, I'm a Marxist, I'm a socialist, I'm a revolutionary, right? I do want to inspire you all, and I do want to inspire you to do right. And I do believe that our message here is in line with the Bible, and Jesus was a socialist, and Jesus was preaching, for the oppressed, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. But I'm not a pastor. Because if I was a pastor, it would just be simple. It would just be watered down, be nice to people, follow the Bible, Jesus will save you. And that's not what I'm on here to preach at you, because we're preaching a very complicated message. That opening message I just gave you all, right? I find it very rarely do I find any minister who preaches anything nearly that complex, right? That there is a level of shallowness in a lot of religious messaging that you hear in the United States. It's really shallow. Their theology consists of follow the Bible. The Bible is literally true. Don't do drugs. Don't be gay. Don't look at porn. Be a good person. Don't have children. You know what I mean? Or have children. I don't know. I mean, it's just like what they're preaching is very, very shallow. It's really, really shallow. And also like, with all due respect to Gavin, who asked the question, like, I don't take the Bible literally. I really don't. And I'm not an evangelical. I don't think the Bible is literally true, and I have my own, I'm a liberal Protestant. That's what I come out of. I grew up in the United Church of Christ, which used to be the Congregational Church. And I don't think the Bible is literally true. I remember when I was in Iran, they were talking to me. Some of the people in Iran wanted to convert me to Islam. And they were like, so do you think the Bible is the word of God? And I'm like, no, I don't. I think it's a compilation of people remembering what Jesus said. I think it's the Hebrew scriptures and the history of the Jewish people. I think that it's, important letters, reminiscences of the life of Jesus. I think it's early documents of the early Christian church, the early letters. But no, I don't think it's literally the word of God. And they're like, oh shit, that was like part of their conversion spiel. But what was supposed to happen was they're like, so do you think the Bible is literally the word of God? And I was supposed to say, yes, I do. And then they were going to say, aha, well then, Caleb, who's John? And I was going to go, what? And they were going to say, and who is Mark? And who is Luke? And who is Matthew? And who's Jeremiah? The Bible does not ever say it is the literal word of God. But the Quran is God speaking from beginning to end, and there's no middleman involved. Aha. Right? That's why I was supposed to convert to Islam. But it didn't work because I don't think the Bible is literally the word of God. I think the Bible is a compilation. The word Bible means set of books or collection of books. That's what it means in Greek, and that's what I think it is. And I know there were many books that didn't make it in. I think from my understanding, in the early years of the Christian church, every church had their scroll. They had like a scroll in the front of every church. Back then, there were no printing presses, so anything written had to be written out. And every individual church had a scroll where they had stuff written down. And then around the time that, the church was being unified and, whatever, then they did finally, I think it was the Vatican decided there was going to be one Bible, right? And at that point, the Bible that was picked. And from what I understand, the reason they picked that one was because some wealthy king had enough, scribes that they could write it out. And so his version had been written out by enough scribes. And so I don't believe that the Bible is the literal word of God, because it doesn't claim to be, because then who's John and who's Matthew and who are the Ephesians and who are the Romans? And I don't believe that. Right. And I also, I do. Well, anyway, that's where I'm at. Right. I consider myself to be a liberal Protestant. I'm not a Catholic. My wife is a Catholic and I love my wife deeply. But I'm not a Catholic. I could never accept the Vatican. I really cannot accept the Vatican as the authority of God on earth. I could never do that. And there are many aspects of Catholicism. I'll be real. I don't understand Catholicism, right? I don't understand Catholicism, and I never have been able to understand Catholicism. And I realize that, a lot of what I do on these live streams is very Protestant, very, very Protestant, right? The way I'm screaming and yelling with passion, that's super Protestant. The whole, we're going to go out and do it and work hard. And, that's very Protestant. And that, Catholicism, is culture. It impacts the culture. And people don't realize that, but like the culture, historically Catholic countries, their culture is different, right? France, Spain, Italy, they are culturally quite different than England and the United States, right? The United States historically was a Protestant country. England is very much a Protestant country, right? King Henry VIII and all of that. And that it impacts the whole culture, right? The whole culture for hundreds of years, it impacts the culture. And, there are things about Catholicism that I don't understand. And I say that with respect, right? I mean, it's not my religion. But like, for example, the Catholic Church doesn't allow the use of birth control, right? It says that using birth control is a sin. Well, I don't agree with them about that, but I respect their right to believe that. But I read somewhere that like 90% of Catholics use birth control. That doesn't make any sense to me, right? If your religion says not to do something, why would you do it? Why would you do it? But then again, Catholics, every time I've ever said this to a Catholic person, then they've said to me, well, Caleb, everyone sins, right? Haven't you ever sinned before? And I'm like, well, of course I have. And then I'm like, so why are you shocked that 92% of Catholics use birth control? I'm like, yeah, but like, I don't get it. You know what I mean? I just don't get it because I'm not Catholic and I'm not supposed to get it. If I was Catholic, I would get it. And if I was not Catholic, I would, I'm not Catholic and I don't get it. Right. So, I respectively say I don't get it. And I don't understand Islam either. I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East and I've read a lot, particularly about Shia Islam. But at the end of the day, I really don't understand Shia Islam. I understand some of it, but I'm not a Shia. Ultimately, if it's not your faith, you don't understand it. Right. And that's why one of my pet peeves, I will say, I will never forget. One time I was in the cafeteria of my college. When I was in college, I attended an awful university in Ohio that shall not be named. It's not hard to find out where it was. I was sitting in my cafeteria, and there was this young man who was an evangelical, and he just went off on Mormons. He just went off on Mormons about how, oh my God, being a Mormon, you have to be an idiot to be a Mormon, and blah, 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 blah. He just, clearly you have to be an idiot to be a Mormon. And then there was this kid sitting next to me who was a conservative Jew. And he just laid into this guy for saying that. And it was very satisfying to watch because this evangelical is sitting there like, how could anyone be a Mormon? Oh my God, Joseph Smith, Doug, and so he just started laying into him and he's like, oh, I could sit here, how could anyone be a Christian? You think Noah's Ark really happened? Oh, you really think that, that there was a talking snake in the garden? You can do that argumentium ad ridicule, right? If you're religious, you lose the right to do that. New atheists do that all the time. They do this. Oh my God, you believe there was a talking snake. Oh my God, you believe there's a magical man in the sky who decides what's right and wrong. I guess if you're an atheist, you can do that. You can be an asshole and do that. But if you have any religious beliefs, your right to do that has gone away, right? And one thing I really don't like is when people of one religious persuasion get this smug look on their face and start mocking other people's religious beliefs, because it shows a kind of shallowness, right? Because, at the point that you become religious, anyone can do that to you, right? I mean, and religion is not, if I wanted to, someone could sit there and start mocking your beliefs in the exact same way because, and it kind of annoys me when people don't have the vision to see that, when people don't get that, right? That when you become religious, you lose the right to argumentium ad ridicule other people's religion. You just lose the right to do that because by definition, being religious means that you believe things that are not quote unquote rational, right? Whatever that means, right? I mean, what does that even mean? But that's my feeling is that, when you become religious, at that point, you lose the right to to argumentium ad ridicule. And that's one thing I don't like, right? I think, is that an actual logical fallacy or did I make that up? Argumentium ad ridicule. Argumentum ad ridiculum. Yeah, right. Argumentium ad ridiculum. Argumentum ad absurdum is a form of arguments that reductio ad absurdium is by claiming that the opposite scenario would lead to absurdity or contradiction. It's not exactly what I was talking about. Well, I should know my fallacies better, but basically, and that, another thing, while we're talking about that, since we got a few super chats here, and if anyone has anything else they want me to talk about, we got like 2 super chats left. So you got anything more to talk about when it comes to super chats, by all means, send me a super chat. But while we're on this, have any bread tubers ever argued against any position I actually take? I mean, sometimes this bothers me more than other times, but it's like, they have gone out of their way. Atheists believe nothing created everything. Exactly, Gavin. I agree with you. Right? I agree with you. But, the bread tubers, there are all these videos attacking me, right? That have like these people with huge platforms are obviously being paid to go after me. And it's probably because of my job and because of my international connections, because of my international positions and all of that. I mean, there's been a lot of Patreon money handed out from anonymous people to encourage certain people to target me. But these people, they never argue against anything that I actually say. Ever. I mean, and it's like, it's weird because they do disagree with me about actual things. But like Sophie from Mars, she continues to insist that I say that COVID came from a lab in Ukraine. I have never said that. Peter Coffin has never said that. George Galloway has never said that. None of us have ever said that COVID came from a lab in Ukraine. We never said that. But that's what she insists. Oh, they're saying that COVID came from a lab in Ukraine. We never said that. All we said is that these labs exist. And they do. And Victoria Nuland confirmed that. But it's like they make up positions that you don't have. And then they attribute them. And they just have a bigger platform. So all these people see it and assume it must be true. Like, I don't think COVID came from a lab in Ukraine. I think it's very possible COVID came from a lab somewhere, which is what Jeffrey Sachs and all kinds of people have admitted now is probably true. But I'm not even sure of that. I don't know that that's a fact. But nobody thinks that COVID came from a lab in Ukraine. Maybe Alex Jones thinks that, but I don't think that. And they lie. They just lie. Right? And like there are videos where Thought Slime, he will quote me saying completely logical things and say, and what he means is, and or this sounds like something that would be said by, and it's like they attribute all kinds of positions to me that I do not have. Right? And there are all these videos on the internet attributing positions to me that I don't take. I don't think COVID came from a lab in Ukraine. I don't, I mean, and it's just like, how hard is it to listen to what I actually say? And these people disagree with a lot of things I actually say. How hard is it to look into what I actually say and disagree with it? Right? The American flag thing, right? The fact that we wave an American flag. People have said, well, he's against reparations. No, I'm not. I am not against reparations. People have said, oh, he waves the American flag. That means he wants American national socialism. No, I don't. Right? He waves the American flag. That means he's saying that there was no genocide of Native Americans. No, I don't. He waves the American flag. Therefore, he's saying that there's no right to self-determination for Native Americans. No, I'm not. Like, I mean, it's just like all the arguments against me are this like, oh my God, I saw an American flag, so that means you must think blah. All right. Oh my God, I saw, oh my God, he said something about a lab in Ukraine, so therefore he's a COVID denying. I didn't say that. Like, I mean, they just lie. Right. And it's like shocking to me how much they lie. You know, I mean, it's shocking to me. I mean, they just go out of their way to just misrepresent my positions over and over and over again. I just lie over and over and over again about what I stand for. And it's like all these videos are on the internet claiming I take positions that I do not take. Right. And it's horrifying. It's utterly horrifying. You know, it's utterly, utterly horrifying. So there you go. There you go. All right. Why are debt ceiling and Ukraine never mentioned in the same paragraph? Because the U.S. government doesn't want us to know that while they're saying, oh, we don't have enough money for schools, we don't have enough money for hospitals, we don't have enough money to hire teachers, and but they got billions and billions of dollars to pour into Kiev to buy weapons so they can torture people and execute civilians and feed the corrupt Ukrainian oligarchy that's siphoning off wealth and committing money laundering. That's why. Yeah, that's why. You know, this war in Ukraine, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's just a money laundering operation, you know, but on top of that, it's a huge drain, and all kinds of weaponry is being sent to, you know, this awful government in Kiev that's killing civilians and has been killing the people of Donbass for 8 years. And yeah, there you go. Comparisons between the USA and the USSR in its final years. Well, a couple of things. One, the biggest one is that no one believes the ruling ideology. Right. And that was the big problem in the USSR. In the final years, nobody believed in communism. Everyone was mouthing communism. It was the official party line. But beneath the surface, a lot of people were Americanized and liberal, and a lot of people were into, you know, nationalism and like, you know, czarist kind of nationalism. No one believed in ML. The end of the final years of the Soviet Union, very few people in the power structure believed in the ruling ideology. So that's one thing. Another thing is in the final years of the USSR, you know, there was not an optimistic feeling on the part of the next generation. You know, young people in the Soviet Union didn't think the country was getting better. They weren't excited about the future of the country. They were kind of pessimistic and caught up in this, everything sucks. The other thing was that people weren't really excited about what they were doing. People generally were just like, yeah, there's really no hope. They were very pessimistic. They had a very tired, pessimistic tone. Yeah, I mean, there was an atmosphere throughout society, and many people have said this, and people from former socialist countries, Poland, other places, you know, they've said, yeah, in the lead up to the fall of communism, the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, suddenly there was just this nobody cares attitude throughout society, where people were just kind of, oh, screw it. The attitude of the whole society was kind of, oh, screw it. People didn't really believe the ruling ideology. They were just kind of mouthing it. The enthusiasm, all the enthusiasm that generally, you know, holds society together goes away, right? That's really what was going on, right? And that is exactly how the United States is now. Very few people actually believe in America right now. Very few people trust the government. Very few people are enthusiastic about the wars that we're fighting around the world. Very few people are enthusiastic about the United States and its history and its founding. There's very, very little enthusiasm. So there you go. That's how it's similar. People are just kind of going through the motions. There's a cynicism that is set in. So there you go. You know, so there you go. There you go. Right. There you go. There you go. There you go. I think that's very similar. I think that's very, very similar. So there you go. There you go. All right. So if there's no further super chats, I guess we can end the stream here. So thanks everybody. We'll be back again soon. Not sure when it'll be. Maybe tomorrow night. Hopefully tomorrow night. We'll be back. I got a lot of things to take care of. We got a big spring coming up. Mark your calendar for February 19th. Mark your calendar for March 25th and 26th. We got a lot going on. It's going to be a big spring. I'm going to try to be on these streams as much as I possibly can because I love you all. But the CPI is marching forward. We got a great plan for this spring. So there you go. Upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.